Text of Zhang Ailing's Young Chapter 6. Sister-in-law Jin Yu washed her clothes and hung them to dry on the boundary monument. The ancient stone piles were speckled and pockmarked. The gray-black clothes were draped on the monument, hanging down weakly, sometimes fluttering slightly in the wind. "Hey, sister-in-law Jin, have you eaten yet?" She looked up and felt panicked. It was Comrade Wang coming over here. And there was a stranger with him, also wearing a uniform. She always panicked when she saw Comrade Wang, which made him feel uneasy and worried that she would not respond appropriately. This time she answered appropriately. "Hey, I've eaten," she agreed with a smile. "Have you had your meal too, Comrade Wang?" He didn't hear what she said, so he hurriedly covered her up and said loudly, "Great, great. Is your father-in-law at home?" She walked into Dang in a panic and shouted, "Comrade Wang is here." Boss Tan and Aunt Tan came out with smiles on their faces. Comrade Wang introduced the uniformed man who came with him to them. "This is Comrade Gu Gang," he said. "Comrade Gu Gang is from Shanghai to study our living conditions here. He wants to live with you and live the same life." They greeted Gu Gang with smiles. Gu Gang is in his 30s and has a slender figure, wearing black-rimmed glasses. The frame of the glasses and his thick black eyebrows seemed to make a serious mistake. His cotton uniform was made of fine green serge, and it was brand new. It looked as if he was not used to wearing liberation clothes, and his whole body was a bit out of place. He explained to them that he was a film director sent by the Federation of Literary and Art Circles to go to the countryside to experience life and collect materials. One of the militiamen, Comrade Xiao Zhang, who was Comrade Wang's orderly, came up from behind panting while carrying Gu Gang's luggage. Gu Gang seemed to feel that, in this situation, he had to fight with him, trying to grab the luggage and move it in by himself. Comrade Xiao Zhang refused to give up. The two struggled all the way. Their steps when carrying the load were crooked, and they almost fell to the ground several times. During the land reform period, Mr. Tan also had intellectuals living in his house, so they were used to it and were quite calm. They are very careful and never dare to apologize to the guests, saying that the food is not good or the house is not good, nor do they say Comrade came from Shanghai. They are always used to saying come from the city, but that is a mistake, as if indicates that cities have a higher status than rural areas. They showed their guests a room where they kept millstones and farm tools. "You can move these things out, remove the door, make planks, and put them onto benches." Comrade Gu said that was great. Then they returned to the main room, where they all admired the dark blue vase that they had drawn by lot, which belonged to their assigned place. At Comrade Wang's request, Aunt Tan ran and called Jin Zhen and his wife. Jin Zhen is a model worker, and his wife has recently returned to her hometown to give birth, so she is very representative of the current new atmosphere. Gu Gang was deeply impressed by them. Some of these rural women were indeed very beautiful, he thought. Aunt Tan talks the most. Most of the others just smiled and murmured, "It's so good in the countryside now." Or "It's different now." Aunt Tan always shouted with great enthusiasm, "If it weren't for Chairman Mao, where would we be? Is there today?" She always added his old man after Chairman Mao, showing special affection and respect. Gu Gang could tell that she was Comrade Wang's most proud exhibit, and maybe that was why he let him live in her house. When Comrade Wang was leaving, Gu Gang saw him off. Comrade Wang spoke of the old woman in a tolerant tone. "She does have one thing. She speaks very straightforwardly." Comrade Wang had already mentioned to him the winter school here, and suggested that he should be asked to teach so that he could have more contact with the masses. Now he said, "Have a good rest, comrade. You must have been hard on the road. I will accompany you to the literacy class tomorrow and introduce you to it." He also explained in detail the importance of literacy classes, which can improve farmers' political consciousness. Listening to him talk about it, it seemed as if the job that Gu Gang was taking turns with the primary school students in the town was the greatest and most difficult job in the country. Gu Gang thought to himself that Comrade Wang was indeed a very good propagandist. Wang also has a long party history, and according to himself, he had actual combat experience in northern Jiangsu. He really deserves a better position. Why is he still working as a village cadre in this remote rural area? Perhaps it is because of the factional struggle within the party that makes him depressed. He may even have been with a certain backbone who was cleared by Mao Zedong. If that's the case, then he is a dangerous person and should not be too close. As a result, Gu Gang became cautious and his attitude became much colder. Comrade Wang walked back alone. He lived in the district office, which was the former Wusheng Temple. After he left Gu Gang, he felt that he had just said a lot about his past. He worked underground during the Japanese occupation. Later, when the news became more popular, he went to northern Jiangsu to join the new Fourth Army. He had no intention of mentioning this. Why would he tell someone this when he was meeting him for the first time? Heroes are not as brave as they used to be. Could it be that he has become a nagging old man who only lives in his own memories? I want to feel sad, probably because Gu Gang's attitude toward him seemed to be a bit contemptuous, which made him couldn't help but boast about his past, and let him know about my past history. He hated it most when Gu Gang talked to him about domestic news, as if he thought he knew nothing except what was going on in the local village. He had never heard Gu Gang's name, but from the tone of the letter of introduction written by the head of the Federation of Literary and Art Circles, it can be seen that he joined their camp only after liberation. I have calculated for myself that I have served the party for more than 20 years, and will always be at the core of the struggle, Comrade Wang said to himself. Now I am here to entertain this opportunist and be looked down upon by him. I am really alive. Such a shameless opportunist, cowardly intellectual, and lackey of the ruling class has suddenly transformed and moved forward, and he still looks down on others. He himself knew that he shouldn't lose his temper, and his estimation of Gu Gang might not be correct, but he always felt very depressed in his heart. He very much hoped that when he returned to the temple, there would be 2 farmers waiting in his office, with some dispute waiting for him to resolve. That might relieve the tightness in his chest a little. He knows how to deal with farmers. Doing something you are good at is always quite enjoyable. And in the minds of farmers, he is the government. They made him feel like he was an indispensable cog in a vast machine, rather than an outdated tool left in a dark corner. He was usually busy from morning till night, and never had any free time, but this afternoon he seemed to have nothing to do. After he returned to the temple, he sat in front of his desk for a while. He was very bored, then stood up again and walked outside with his hands behind his back. Comrade Xiaozhang was the housekeeper for him, sitting on a thin dumpling in front of the door, peeling garlic there. The old thin ball, the blue cloth burst open, revealing the straw inside. Comrade Xiaozhang washed his clothes and hung them on a rope on the carved sill. A faint shadow of the sun shone on the pale red temple wall, motionless. Comrade Wang suddenly remembered that he seemed to have always lived in the temple, in the dark empty rooms in the vast halls. The ghost of the expelled Shinto seemed to be lingering, still coming and going. When he married Shaming, he also lived in the temple. He knew. Anyway, whenever he thought of the past, he would immediately think of her. And that seemed to be the easiest part to remember. The first time I met her was at a cadre meeting. He was in the new Fourth Army in northern Jiangsu. At that time he used his current name, Wang Lin. That time, all the cadres were gathered in a small county town for a big class, and they borrowed the residence of a landlord. The landlord himself is no longer there, having moved to Wau. The dark hall was erected with blue stone pillars, and the wind was blowing, a bit like the dusk outdoors. Everyone sat on the brick floor listening to the speech, each taking notes with a pad on his knees. As usual, the speech ended with slogan shouting. Everyone stood up and shouted, "Long live Chairman Mao." At the same time, they threw their hats into the air with all their strength, throwing them as high as they could. But when the hat falls, not everyone is able to catch their own one. Everyone was scrambling for hats, but the speaker had already raised one arm high, and horse followed suit. "Long live Stalin," he shouted. "Long live Stalin." Everyone shouted, and hats flew into the sky like black rain. After the meeting, Wang Lin noticed a female cadre standing there with a hat in her hand, looking very embarrassed. She put on the wrong hat. She is very young. The hair of other female cadres was cut short and hung greasy on the cheeks. But she had braids coiled on the top of her head, hidden under her hat, completely invisible. So at first glance, one would think of her as a boy, especially because of her clear, bloodless face and widely separated eyes, giving her the appearance of a handsome boy. But now that she is not wearing a hat and showing her pigtails, she looks exactly like a schoolgirl. The uniform she wore was too big, and it made her figure look even more slender. Wang Lin took off a dirty old hat on his head, turned it over in his hand and looked at it. It was obviously his own. I was really embarrassed to go up to her and ask her if he had picked up her hat. Several male cadres asked her about their hats, but none of them belonged to her. Later, a man found a hat perched high on a roof beam. A young man named Yu immediately managed to get an old ladder, climbed up, and took it down for her. When Wang Lin left the meeting, Comrade Yu was still standing there talking to her. Although Wang Lin knew that Comrade Yu's position was too low, and he was not qualified to get married, he did not feel at ease because of this. Who was the one who lost his hat just now? He asked another cadre as if he was impatient. What a joke. I haven't seen her before. She's new here. What? Are you interested in him? Don't talk nonsense. After the meal, he tried to ask another person, the one with braids. Is her lover's surname Chen? She's never married, right? You mean Shaming, right? She's been here less than a year, and she's in the telecommunications team, so she's not married. Maybe I made a mistake, he murmured. I thought she was Comrade Chen's lover. All female cadres spent the night in the cooperative. He went to the cooperative early the next morning and asked to talk to Comrade Shaming. It is also decorated according to an ordinary store, with a row of mahogany chairs on one side and a coffee table sandwiched between the two chairs. He sat down, with a red paper couplet hanging on the wall behind him, congratulating the cooperative on its opening. This should be a good sign, Wang Lin thought, proposing to her in a cooperative. This should be the beginning of our lifelong cooperation in revolutionary positions. The early morning sunlight shines in from outside the door, illuminating the baskets of rice and red beans at his feet, the gray mushrooms and fungus, and the large pieces of bamboo shoots, emitting a dry and slightly sweet smell. The female cadres were talking loudly on the counter and rolling up their clothes. They slept on the counter last night. Then he saw Shaming walking towards him in a hurry. Wang Lin introduced himself. I want to talk to you, he said. She smiled and sat down, obviously prepared for criticism. She later complained to him that she thought he must have come to give her advice about braiding her hair, which had attracted a lot of criticism. I heard that you are not married yet, Wang Lin said. Me neither. I propose that we ask the organization to get married. What do you think? She was quite calm, he thought. Of course, she seemed a little surprised. I smiled and replied, think about it. On my side, there is no need to reconsider. I have already made up my mind. She still smiled and said, this is a very serious step. Let's think about it again. He didn't push her to make an immediate decision. Seeing her in the sunlight gave him a strange feeling. She was like a yellowed photo, looking so young but faded. He seemed to feel that he had to be careful not to touch the photo with his fingers, otherwise it would fade, become lighter, or even disappear completely. 2 weeks later, he went to look for her at a telecommunications station 20 miles away. She had to wake up a colleague on the night shift and work as a substitute before she could get out to talk to him. We'd better submit an application and go in, he suggested. If one of the two people is not suitable for marriage, don't worry, the organization will definitely tell us. We can let the organization decide this matter for us. She still said the same thing, think about it. But when he went to her for the second time, she gave in and said hesitantly, okay, so they submitted the application and got permission. One evening, Wang Lin sent an orderly to pick her up on a horse. The sound of horse hooves sounded particularly clear in the silence of dusk. He stood on the stone steps in front of the temple door and waited until the sound of hoofbeats had faded away before entering. The main hall was dark, with only some lights coming from their doors. One could vaguely see the green and red faces of the statues next to them, and the golden folds of their clothes. The torn window paper crackled in the wind. He walked through the darkness and entered the east side hall, which was his room. The room was clean today and things were sorted, the light shone on it and it seemed empty, giving it a special feeling. The party was more willing to compromise during the war, so they stationed themselves in this temple, did not destroy the idols, and allowed the nuns to continue to stay. But the young nuns all ran away. There was an old nun left who lived in Hujin and was doing her nighttime homework. She was beating the wooden fish toto evenly, and it continued forever, like leaking water drops in ancient times, for a dead world. Record the time. Wang Lin walked around in his room, waiting for the girl to come. He gradually felt in a trance and felt that the charming atmosphere was gradually deepening. She came that night and left at dawn. The orderly who had picked her up sent her back and held the horse for her. After that he picked her up once a week. She always comes at night and leaves at dawn, like the ghost's mistress in those old stories. Sometimes he almost struggled to break the witch-like charm. He would rather see her as ordinary, just like other people's wives, a part of daily life. But no, only once did he feel that they were indeed a couple. There was a cadre meeting, but due to the military situation, it was held in the small town where he was stationed. The Communist Party has always paid great attention to the layout of the venue. Before a meeting, a senior official will personally inspect the venue for a week. If he thinks that the vase of flowers on the table is not as good as expected, he will get angry and the responsible cadre may be punished. But in this dilapidated town in the war zone, there are no flowers, no bright paper tapes, no dramatic lighting installations. There was not even an enlarged portrait of Chairman Mao to be found. That was the most indispensable thing. Wang Lin was very anxious. In the end, Xia Ming solved the problem for him. He pasted a large piece of red paper on the middle wall and wrote a line of large characters, "Long live Mao Zedong." The locals always use steel basins to wash their faces. She filled the steel basins with cooking oil and placed them on the table, one on each side during the meeting. The oil in the basin was lit on fire and burned. The big orange flame jumped very high, jumping and jumping. The light and shadow floated on the background of the red paper. All the cadres raised one arm, swore allegiance to the party, and the venue was filled with a mysterious and solemn atmosphere. Wang Lin was extremely proud, as if they had invited guests at home. His wife entertained them well and the result was a complete success. Afterward, he talked to her about the day's events. All the interesting things and the little misfortunes were very interesting in retrospect. The happiest moment was when all the guests left, but she did not follow him, but stayed at his place for the night. She told him about joining the new Fourth Army. In her last year of high school, there was a female teacher who often talked to her outside class and became very close to her. This person is a communist, in the girl's mind. This kind of secret activities are too exciting. Talking softly late at night, peeking under the quilt to read promotional books, and lighting candles under the quilt. The female teacher told her, only the Soviet Union really helped China resist Japan. She often reported the news of Yannan's great victory in the battle with the Japanese army, and everyone celebrated in private. So Shashi and several other female classmates became believers in communism. The female teacher later left Kangsheng district and went to northern Jiangsu to join the new Fourth Army, so she took them along with her. She only adopted the name Shaming after arriving here. She thought the name was masculine and playful, like a fashionable pen name. She told him about how she spent the winter here last year. For telecommunications workers, 1 man and 3 women were stationed in a farmer's house and occupied a main room. He works onto square tables during the day and sleeps on the tables at night. The main room had no door, so the soldiers seized it and used it as firewood. The north wind blew in so hard that it was impossible to light the oil lamp, making night work very difficult. Although there is no door, it is warmer indoors than in the cattle pen. So the owner of the house always brings the cattle in at night and ties them to the windowsill. Every time I heard the cow peeing, one of the 2 telegraph operators on the night shift would jump up quickly, run over, put a bucket under the cow's belly, and then return to her on the seat after the cow peed. Someone had to quickly move the bucket away. Otherwise it would kick it over and the ground would be flooded with urine, and the soles of the cow's feet would be covered in water. Having a cow in the room also has the same benefit. On a snowy night, the three girls huddled under the cow's belly and slept like calves. She told him this, as if she were embarrassed, and laughed with him at her unexpected predicament. It is indeed a painful experience for the petty bourgeoisie to plunge into the furnace of revolution, he admitted, but in order to be completely transformed, we have to go through this stage. He pitied her, but he didn't express it verbally. At most, he said, you are not in good health, so you can't endure hardship. But you will get better. In the summer, she fell ill due to miscarriage. She lay on a panel door and was carried to the temple. There was a medical station in the temple where wounded soldiers lived. Wang Lin likes to be with her very much, but he doesn't have time to take care of her. The whole situation was tense for years, until finally they had to make a hasty retreat. It was late at night when the order to retreat came. Everyone immediately became busy and became a mess. The peasants' belongings borrowed by the soldiers had to be returned to them, because their slogan was "Don't take away a stitch from the people." You could hear them banging on the door and shouting, "Auntie, auntie." An old woman was dreaming of buttoning up her buttons with sleepy eyes. He pressed the button and opened the door cautiously. The soldier handed her a chair with broken legs, or a broken pot with a big hole in the bottom. He thanked her and lent it to them for 6 months. "We're leaving now, but don't worry, Aunt," he said comfortingly. "We will be back." Wang Lin had countless things he wanted to take care of. He hurried back to the room and found Xia Ming struggling to sit up, packing up her things, and making a small bag. At this moment, he felt very sad and didn't know how to tell her that she couldn't go with him. The road is not easy. He sat down on the edge of the bed, turned around and faced her, pressing his palms on his knees, showing a very dignified look. "We have to take care of your health, so you'd better not move. I've made an agreement with Comrade Feng to let you live in his house temporarily." Comrade Feng is Wang Lin's orderly. Wang Lin was very sure that the two elders of the Feng family would be loyal to him, because their son was a hostage in the new Fourth Army. She slowly continued to pack her things, but she finally stopped, as if she was overtired, and threw herself forward, burying her face in the bundle. He knew she was pregnant. "Be strong," he said. "This is a very common thing. Comrades often have to stay behind enemy lines to lay ambushes." "I'm going to come along," she whimpered. "But there are not enough stretchers." He became anxious and finally told the real reason. "There aren't that many people carrying stretchers. Wounded soldiers have to be carried away. You are a sick woman. It doesn't matter. Wounded men can't get through." He had some things of his own to sort out. After a while, he looked back and saw that she had stopped crying and was continuing to organize things. There was already the sound of roosters crowing, and the yellow light of the oil lamp was diluted by the gray morning light, revealing a bleak color. He felt like they were going to catch an early train, and he felt panicked. Comrade Feng's father and brother came carrying a door panel, helped her out of bed, laid her down on it, and covered her with a quilt. In fact, the weather is very hot, but it seems that patients should stay warm. Wang Lin bent down, stuffed the quilt behind her neck, and said softly, "It's okay for you, but I'd rather be careful and get better soon. We'll be back soon." She nodded slightly on the pillow. Her face was damp and pale. "Comrade, don't worry. It doesn't matter," the old man said loudly. However, the old man was obviously in a very heavy mood, helplessly awaiting the countless troubles and dangers ahead. Wang Lin suddenly felt a chill in his heart when he listened to his barely pretended cheerful tone. He stood there as they carried her across the rice fields, under the morning stars. The army moved to another area. It was already the end of the anti-Japanese war, and all parties involved in the war had become indifferent due to extreme fatigue, and no one was willing to work seriously. Often after a vigorous battle, no one died, and it became a farce situation. No matter which side rushes forward with all their strength, the other side will collectively surrender, but as soon as there is an opportunity, they fall back. Everyone is just going back and forth like this. It doesn't matter. Entire regiments and divisions of troops were like piles of chips being pushed around on the card table. In this situation, of course, people often cross the border, and it is convenient to carry messages. But as time passed, It seemed that Xia Ming had completely lost contact with the new Fourth Army. Don't know what happened to her. There are many possibilities. Maybe she was discovered. Maybe someone relied on a secret agent and arrested her. Or maybe her fever became severe and she lacked medicine. And she died. Wang Lin once managed to send a person to deliver a letter to Fang An. The letter was written by their son, asking about Xia Ming's whereabouts. The Fang family replied that they sent her away because someone in the area knew her, and there was a risk of being discovered. So they sent her to another village far away to stay with one of their relatives. But they heard she had left there of her own accord. Wang Lin finally got a chance to go there to investigate in person. He disguised himself as a small businessman and went to the village that the Fang family had heard about to find their relative, named Zhao Beige. Brother Zhao is a dwarf about 40 years old, with protruding eyes, a short face, and a green scalp. The hairstyle seems to be flattened. He has no chin, which seems to be for self-defense, lest someone punch his chin and give him a fatal blow. He was wearing a blue cloth coat elegantly, and he was not an ordinary farmer. If you ask about the local timber, sericulture, tea mountains, salt transportation, and taxation, he is familiar with everything. However, he still does his duty and is very individual. Wang Lin pretended to be very interested in wood, but the Fang family gave him some advice and told him to ask Brother Zhao for advice when he passed by. Brother Zhao was very eloquent. His eloquence was so good that Wang Lin thought Bago must be his nickname. But then I saw his wife coming out and everyone called her Grandma 8. And then I realized that he was indeed Xing Ba. Brother Zhao left him to eat at the dinner table. The host explained in detail the complexity and subtleties of the tax payment procedures. There were various checkpoints along the way, and you could encounter various armies at any time. This was an unfortunate no-one area, being ravaged by Japanese soldiers, communists, the peace army, and various miscellaneous armies in turn. After they drank some gu wine, Zhao Beige told the story of that time the Japanese soldiers came down from Tongzhou. I was sitting at home, he said, and walked in. One of the leading officers asked me, "Are you a commoner?" I said, "Yes." Then he asked me again, "Do you like Chinese soldiers? Or do you like Japanese soldiers?" This question made me happy. I don't know how to answer. I don't know whether he is a Chinese soldier or a Japanese soldier. He also spoke Chinese. You can tell it right away by listening to their accents, Wang Lin said. After the words came out of his mouth, he remembered that to the country people, the Mandarin of the Japanese soldiers and the Mandarin of the Northerners sounded equally strange and ridiculous. Brother Zhao didn't argue with him. He just nodded his head and continued talking. Nuan, you can't tell by the accent. The only way is to tell by looking at their boots. Nuan, they are both, but I don't dare to look. He tilted his head back slightly, stiffened his neck, and made standing at attention. He smiled and shook his head. Don't dare look down. Wang Lin smiled patiently and said nothing. Then what did I answer him? I sighed and said, "Oh sir, we people are suffering. When we see soldiers, whether they are Chinese soldiers or Japanese soldiers, they are all the same to us. We just want peace. Everyone is fine." Hearing this, he said, "You are right. That way." I knew he was a Japanese soldier. When he said this, he seemed to feel very proud. After the meal, Wang Lin stood up and said goodbye. When Zhao Beige heard that he was leaving for a neighboring county soon and had to get there before dark, he felt very relieved to persuade him to stay and repeatedly said, "It's a pity that I can't stay here for 2 days. It's a rare trip." Mr. Ba is too enthusiastic, Wang Lin said, "but the name of your enthusiastic place has already gone out." "Ha, if you don't mention it, I would have forgotten it. I have a relative who is a young female family member. I passed by here last time. I heard that I also bothered Mr. 8 a lot of time. I forgot about it. Thanks." Young female dependents? Brother Zhao seemed to be startled. "She used to live in Fang's house," Wang Lin said, staring at him to see if his expression changed. Brother Zhao seemed confused. "You are mistaken. We have no young female relatives here. She may have put on makeup to hide her true age. I always treat her as a child." Wang Lin laughed. Maybe it's because when I saw her before, she was still very young and had a bad temper. Actually, Nuan, she's quite young. She probably looks like a middle-aged lady. We don't have any middle-aged ladies here, Zhao Beigo said, shaking his head. No. I heard that she was sick. I heard that after this illness, she became so old that she almost became an old lady. No old lady has been here either, Brother Zhao said firmly. It's not that Wang Lin doesn't understand that Brother Zhao probably has his own reasons for not telling the truth. Fearing that he is a spy on the other side, hunting down a female Communist Party member. So Wang Lin took the risk and exposed his identity. Don't be afraid, tell me the truth, he said. I'm from the new Fourth Army. Tell me honestly what happened, but don't lie. If you tell us lies, your name will be on our blacklist, and your family will never want to live. Brother Zhao was in a dilemma. This man himself said that he was a communist, but who knew which side he was on? This time there was no use even looking at his boots. He was wearing casual clothes, no boots. Brother Zhao couldn't make up his mind, so he had to delay for time, denying that anyone had ever stayed in his home. No wife of any age had ever entered his home. The Fang family said they sent her to you. What did you do to her? Did you betray her? She was sent to the gendarmerie. Wang Lin pressed to ask. Oh my god, how can there be such a thing? It's such a shame. If the Fang family really said that, then they are lying. Oh my god, how did I offend them to harm me like this? Where did you take our people? Tell the truth. You killed our comrades, and you don't want to die. After a lot of intimidation, Brother Zhao finally told the truth and admitted that he had once sheltered a sick girl here. Brother Zhao Beige thought that if Wang Lin turned around again and revealed that he was someone sent by the other side, he could still defend himself and say that he was forced to fabricate the story because he couldn't. Saying this, there is no way to send that person away. Where is she now? She left in August and said she wanted to go to Zhenjiang to go to the hospital for treatment. She said she had relatives in Zhenjiang. Walked alone? When she left, her health was much better. She said she could leave by herself and no one would take her away. Zhuo Gutaoshi she was very timid, but after asking again and again, Zhao Beige still said these few words. Wang Lin thought his words were probably credible, because Xia Ming did have an uncle living in Zhenjiang. For Wang Lin returned to his workplace, feeling quite satisfied, but soon many new doubts surrounded him. Why has there been no news from her? If she was in a big place like Zhenjiang, it would be easy to find contacts and she would not be completely cut off from information. Gradually, there were rumors that someone had seen her in Zhenjiang. She apparently betrayed the revolution and became a deserter. Her name was often mentioned in discussions. What could Wang Lin have to say? She could only say, it's a pity that her position is unstable. But petty bourgeois intellectuals have always been vacillating. They cannot endure hardship. I have no ability. I feel very ashamed for influencing her and trying to win over her further, and I need to reflect on it. He doubted for the first time whether she was happy when she was with him. Their union was not recognized by the outside world, so it was very likely that she had married someone else, settled down, and lived the vulgar and boring life of a housewife in a small city. Wang Lin told himself that aside from all personal feelings, he still sincerely hoped that she would return to the revolutionary ranks. Under the current tight situation, it is the time to employ people, and the organization is particularly tolerant. As long as she fully expresses her repentance, she will probably be rehired without having to go through a long period of repentance. Wang Lin followed the army and drove into a small town one evening. This city has changed hands many times and has been mostly reduced to ruins after repeated violent bombardments. The tired and unorganized procession walked past the pier along the river and stepped onto a long cobblestone street. There was not a soul on the street. The houses on both sides had been blown up, leaving incomplete whitewashed walls standing one after another. The roof of the old-style house is high. Although it is only 2 stories, it is a very tall building. Everyone lined up and walked past a roofless white house with a row of dark windows. Wang Lin occasionally raised his head and looked up. He was surprised when he saw a girl in the window of the building, leaning on the window and looking at him. He really didn't expect that people could live in this kind of house. In the dusk, the girl's face was just a blurry white shadow, but it could still be seen that she was beautiful. And what surprised him most was smiling at him. He turned around and looked elsewhere. This must be a brothel. These bitches are stupid and don't know that there is no use in trying to do business with the new Fourth Army. But he was suddenly startled and immediately raised his head again. There was a voice in his heart shouting, "Sha Ming." Sha Ming, however, that face was gone, as if she heard a stormy cry that suddenly rose in his heart, scaring her away. He took a step to the side and left the team, standing there with his head raised and staring at the window in a daze. She hid when she saw him, but she was clearly smiling at him just now. She must have come down the stairs in a hurry. Walking on the dark stairs, if she were not careful, she would fall to her death. He found a rectangular opening, which was obviously the former door, and stepped in. In the first moment, I was a little confused and didn't know what was going on. Waves of cool wind blew on his cheeks. Various black shapes stood on all sides, but a faint purple-blue light shone above the head. It was as if there were crickets chirping underfoot. He is standing outdoors. The entire house was blown up, leaving only a wall in front. There was nothing behind the wall except some rubble. He raised his eyes and looked for the window. The woman I saw leaning against the window just now was the first window on the left. So if I turn it round, it should be the first window on the right. It's just a rectangular hole in the wall. A corner of the white wall was missing. Standing there lonely against the dark blue sky, he looked into the window. It was empty, with only the dusk sky and a slight wind. The stars had just come out, twinkling. He couldn't help but feel a chill at the back of his head, as if his scalp was being tightened. He could hear the rhythmic patter of the troops marching down the empty streets. Wang Lin heard the footsteps gradually disappearing, and he suddenly went crazy with fear. He dashed out into the street and overtook them as fast as he could. Although this experience greatly shocked his nerves, it also filled his heart with a feeling that was close to joy. He believed that she must be dead. She met him today just to let him know that she was dead. She didn't want him to think that she had abandoned him and followed someone else. Then his past education reared its ugly head and told him that this was pure superstition. But he did see it with his own eyes. He must be insane. He thought sadly that not only had he lost her, but he had also lost his reason. It was many years before he heard any definite news about her. After the communists occupied the mainland, he was transferred to many different places. During this period, I met an old colleague with whom I was quite familiar. The man told him that he had seen Sha Ming in Suzhou. She acted as if she didn't know him when they met, so he didn't greet her. But then he went to inquire about it and heard that she was married, had 2 children, and had a shop selling rattan utensils and straw slippers. When Wang Lin heard the news, he was not deeply touched. The extreme emotional fatigue has already made him a lot indifferent. He has also become accustomed to this kind of thinking that she is still alive in the world, giving birth to boys and girls, gradually aging, and living in another man's home. He got a chance to visit his hometown. I haven't been home for 17 years. His mother was still alive, but the distance between her and him was so great that they had nothing to talk about. Anyway, when she saw him, she kept talking, recounting the sad things, the hardships she suffered, and the losses she suffered over the years, one by one. No matter how he comforted her, saying that from now on, things would slowly get better, it still couldn't make her happy. She has no confidence in the bright future under the rule of the Communist Party. And in fact, her family situation is getting increasingly difficult. His salary was a supply-based salary, and of course he couldn't bring money home. There was also a child bride at home, and he left the house before he could consummate the marriage. That woman was very honest. He hadn't come back in the past 20 years, and she didn't run away with anyone. She was still at his house. These many years of hard work, beatings, and bullying have turned her into an old and ugly woman. Wang Lin felt a little sorry for her. He married her, but he rarely went back, and every time he went back, he only felt lonelier. Although he has no friends and has a good relationship with everyone, he is too confident and stubborn and is not willing to accommodate or deal with his boss. For this reason, no matter what went wrong, he was always criticized. During meetings, even if he had the upper hand in the argument, the superior person presiding over the meeting would always turn him around when summing up, putting him at a disadvantage. After the Communist Party swept across the mainland, not only did he not get promoted, but he was labeled as not keeping up with the situation. Being a cadre is a life and death profession, and of course there is no possibility of dismissing him. Like many other veteran cadres, he was transferred to the countryside to hold a lowly position, which was their pension. He has absolutely no objection to the party's general policies. No matter how unreasonable or unacceptable it is, the training he has received can enable him to quickly clear his mind and accept it with peace of mind. What roused his disgust were some small things. The wives of government officials would always be officials and had nothing to do with food. Besides, no matter what they did, just like in the old society, they still had to rely on knowing people and finding connections. At the same time, he also felt a little apprehensive about the shocking waste of government. For example, many Buddhist temples in Beijing and Shanghai were rebuilt and made magnificent, just to please the visiting Tibetan representatives. He knew where all the money came from, because he handled it and extracted it bit by bit from the farmers with great difficulty. He often feels angry, but this is a kind of helpless anger, like a lonely old man who is regretted and humiliated by his only friend. When he gets angry, no one tries to persuade him. He can't stand it for long. He went round again. Apart from the party, he really has nothing in this world.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.